Hi, my name is The Voltage YTA. I'll be going over some Ascendency classes I thought of for the Marauder in Path of Exile 2. I'm happy to hear whatever criticisms you might have in the comments or other ideas. I'm going to be starting off with Totem Master, which is based around totem builds. So, starting from the middle, you have plus 15 increased totem damage. That's self-explanatory. Middle is plus 1 to max totem, similar to the Warbringer. The 5% chance for ancestor totems only applies to ancestor totems, which means that you can't access this with earthquake totems. And what this will do is essentially add some extra chances for more tiny totems to spawn around while you're using the totems. And then another 15% increased totem damage just for extra damage. And then for the big little spot right here, ancestral totems no longer require endurance charges, but can only have the amount of totems at current limit. What that means is, let's say you have plus 5 plus 5 totem amount. That means you can only summon 5 ancestral totems, and you don't have to use endurance charges anymore. And then I'm gonna go from there up to this little branch. Uh, Totems gain 5% rejuvenation rate, which means that if you have the rejuvenation passive skill, or sorry, not passive skill, but a support gem, it gives you extra rejuvenation. And then all totems gain Searing Bond, and that's a skill from Path of Exile 1. But I thought it would be a interesting idea to, instead of having it be a ability that you can get from a skill gem, it's a unique skill that can only be acquired with Totem Master. And then going up from that branch still, it goes from plus 15 increase channeling speed for channeling skills like Supercharged Slam or Perfect Strike. And I thought this one was really interesting. So totems use war cries instead of you. The amount of endurance charges is the amount of totems that use the war cries. So let's say you have, right now the max is 6 endurance charges, I believe. I think there's ways to get more, but I'm not going to list those right now. So you get 6 endurance charges. You can spend those on a war cry, and then let's say you have 5 or so totems, then those totems will use the war cry and then the attack they're using. So to go up from there, 15% increased channeling speed, so that also goes here. And then this one is interesting. It now lets you use ancestral totems for like basic melee skills like Bone Crush or others. And then could also use channeling skills like Supercharged Slam, which will be an interesting dynamic to use with Ancestral Warrior totems. So now going from the right up, starting with this branch, gives you 15% increased elemental damage, and that leads up into this passive skill, this skill, which based on the primary elemental damage you use, a special totem is given for each element. You can only have one of these totems at all times, however it does scale with totem damage and is classified as a special totem. So I wasn't able to fit it in this little text box right here, but essentially imagine you have electric damage. You would basically be using like an earthquake totem, but instead of an earthquake burst, it does like a lightning burst. And if your main damage is ice, it'll do like an ice nova. And if your damage is fire, it'll do like a fire burst. So that's the easiest way to explain it. And it'll give you like a special skill that you can put skill gems on, uh, but you can't put overabundance on it because it won't work. So you can only have just one of these, so you can build around that. So to further continue up the branch, this gives you plus 15% totem attack speed. This gives you 10% chance for earthquakes to echo on earthquake totem. This gives you another 15% on attack speed. And I think this one is really special because it reintroduces a mechanic that no longer exists in Path of Exile, which is the ancestral war chief sort of spirit that used to be on ancestral war chief. And how it works is it uses your basic melee weapon damage, and in this instance it would also use the earthquake, so it would be using your main melee as well as the earthquake. So imagine it like you have the earthquake going off, and instead of you using your basic attack, the spirit on top of the totem would be using the basic attack, if that makes sense. So that's the Totem Master explained, and I'll be continuing on to the next one. So this ascendancy is called Savage, and what this does is allows you to spec into some damage types that warrior can't normally get to unless they're intelligence based. So to start off from the middle again, it goes from here up here and gives you 5% faster bleeding, and then you go up here and it gives you slam attacks that give you hemio crystals without the downside of preventing further bleeding. So that'll be good if you're running a bleed build and want like more explosive stuff going on. The 5% faster bleeding again for extra bleed speed, and then this one gives you bleeding enemies explode into splashes of bloody ground and spread into enemies that are standing on that bloody ground. I was gonna try and fit that wording in there, but couldn't really fit it in there, so that goes there. And then, starting from the bottom again, you go this path gives you 5% bypassing of chaos resistance on enemies. And then this one gives you converts 10% of physical damage to chaos damage. This one also bypasses chaos resistance again. And this is like the special ability of this one, where all ancestrally boosted skills leave a chaos sigil on the ground, dealing 30% more chaos damage instead of physical damage. So instead of doing that like glowing green slam that it usually does whenever you ancestrally boost a slam, it would leave a sigil on the ground that would increase your next slam, which would now be doing chaos damage instead of physical damage. So further going off to the left, you get plus 50 to spirit, and spell totems use spirit instead of endurance or power charges. Basically, that's means that you're using it sort of like a summon instead of a like mana or endurance charge based summon. So it's more like a normal minion. Then going off to the right here, channeling skills fire off poison when released and convert any elemental damage to poison damage. So let's say you're using supercharged slam, instead of doing that massive explosion, it'll do like a massive like poison explosion, and it'll convert all that fire damage into poison damage. This will give you +1 endurance, and so will this one. Skipped over that by accident. And then endurance charges consumed will create a poison cloud that damages enemies over time based on physical damage for this last little spot on the branch. And the last little part here is 5% increased curse duration, and slime attacks generate curses. I couldn't fit it on screen, but basically the slime attack is based off of whatever you're doing here. So if you're doing bleed, it'll give you a curse that makes them weak to bleed. If you're doing poison, it'll give them a curse that makes them weak to poison. And if they're doing chaos, it'll make them weak to chaos with a curse. And that's the Savage Ascendency. And for the last Ascendancies, Follower of Calm. I don't know if that's the way to pronounce it, but I'm just going to go with it. So this is mostly fire-based Ascendancy, similar to the Path of Exile 1 fire-based Ascendancy. I can't think of the name right now, but if you've played Path of Exile 1, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm going to start from here, and these little passives give you +1 to volcanic fissures. This big node gives you can't summon totems, but increases your max endurance charges to 10. Basically meaning that you can't run totems with this, but you can use a lot of war cries or other things of that nature. This node gives you consumed endurance charges, leave volcanic fissures on the floor. So basically, whenever you're using a war cry or consuming endurance charges in another way, it'll leave a volcanic fissure on the ground. So let's say you're summoning a totem. Instead of summoning a totem, or sorry, no, when you summon a totem, it'll summon it'll create a volcanic fissure on the ground as well. So you pop a ancestral warrior totem, and it'll create a fissure on the ground. But if you take this, obviously you can't use this. Or sorry, you can't use the ancestral warrior totem. Going from there, it goes up here, and if you're using magma barrier, you can activate it twice, meaning that it charges up. The enemy will hit you, and it'll give you endurance charge, but it'll stay up for a second block and give you more endurance charges. In this node, it gives you a magma barrier that grants 3 endurance charges on block. At 10 charges, it creates an explosion that erupts all fissures on the block. And what that means is, like with the skill eruption that just came out, whenever it explodes, the fireballs will erupt from the ground and also make the lava go crazy like it usually does when you slam on it. That's what that will look like. And once that happens, it'll remove the fissures as well. I meant to put that. Going down this way gives you +10 increased melee for this small node and this small node. This big node gives all thorn damage from shields as 50% fire damage, and going from here to this node, it says that it gives you shields that can be used as a weapon. So I wasn't able to put it here, but this also applies to Giant's Blood. So if you get Giant's Blood, you'll be able to dual wield tower shields while also using them as weapons. And going down this last one, This gives you penetration of 10% fire resistance. And lastly, and I think this one is a really good upside, is Avatar Fire downside is completely negated with this passive. So if you're looking to run a fully fire build, then this would be the Ascendency to run. That is the Ascendancy concepts I have for Marauder. If you have any comments or suggestions on what could be added, I'd be happy to hear them. Until then, see you next video.